All right, it is 5 o'clock, so I will call the meeting to order. Is there any public comment or roll call?
Linda Hoke, Lindsay Keisman,
Here.
John Reinert,
Here.
Carolyn Schofield,
Here.
Amy Rath.
Here. Public comment? All right, I will ask for approval of the minutes.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes for the November 12th, 2024 meeting.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passed. I know that before we got started, given that there are several new members, we wanted to do a quick overview of the Ethics and Compliance Committee. So who would like to go through that, Karen?
All right, good evening, everyone. So we meet quarterly. A large part of what we cover is the compliance activities. So this meeting will look a little differently because we're actually doing that year-end closeout of fiscal year 24. But going forward, we will cover the audits. You'll get copies of the audit reports for the audits that we've conducted, and I'll give highlights of those. And we always go over the quarterly reports or the outcome summaries as well.
Questions? All right, thank you. So we will start moving through the agenda, starting with 4A, Board Development.
Thank you, Amy. So board development is something that's normally on the executive director's plate, along with the president and the executive team, to really look at the board development for what's needed for the year. So during the Ethics and Compliance Committee, we do have it as part of the board development policy that if there's any core competencies, again, most of your core competencies we put in your virtual manual. So that is all listed, most of your core competencies are there, but if there's anything else that you want for this next year that you're feeling like you need more refresher, please, let us know. I also do want to mention that we have the ACMI meetings. The ACMI meetings are the Association, for Community Mental Health Authorities of Illinois, and that's basically our association with all the other mental health boards across the state of Illinois. We have quarterly meetings, and besides the leadership team, many times there's board members that are there. I think it's a very helpful way for board members to get to know other mental health boards across the state of Illinois, but also to also increase some core competencies with that. So there is going to be the spring ACMI meeting is going to be on April 3rd and 4th, and that usually the spring meeting is normally in Springfield or Bloomington. It's normally down south. I know they have the winter meeting is normally up here, but the spring meeting is in Springfield, and that's on April 3rd and 4th. For the 3rd, those meetings start around noon with lunch, and then there's meetings for the rest of the afternoon so that you have your travel time that morning to get to Springfield. And then on the 4th, the meetings usually end around noon or 1, depending on how long the business meetings last. So if you are interested, we will send you more information about that because obviously in Springfield there is hotel reservations that Bridget will need to make for you if you're interested in going. But I do recommend board members to attend the ACMI meetings, and again, I will give you more information about the upcoming meeting. So getting back to board development, is there, I know number 3, we are going to be scheduling network provider information about services, programs. We do have that presentation component as part of your board meeting. So because we do have some new board meeting members, we will want to have more presentations coming in, probably related to our funding so that it could help make decisions. So for some of those agencies that we weren't able to fully fund that we know may come back, having them come to our meeting, giving us updates of where they're at may be helpful. So we'll be scheduling some of those along the way. But if there's anything else, you can give me feedback now or anytime in the future.
And it's, sorry, it's still not related to that, but it is related to the piece of paper in front of us. And I have a question because it came up on the next meeting too. And it's just with the dates, like with the approval date and the created date. Is that like the original and then did these change at all? And I know it's just because it confused me because I'm wondering, has this changed? And if it's changed, did that the date get changed? Because then it's like approved by, like it has your name by it, but then like you weren't here on that approval date. So I just was looking at the clarification on the dates and the names.
Sure, I can provide that. Agreed. I thought the same thing when I've seen the policies. So it's through our policy management software, and so we do have the original dates of when it was approved. Unfortunately, we update the responsible person to the current executive director. So even though it was approved before Leonetta's time on the board, it does show that it was her name that's the approver. She's the one now responsible for it.
And then just if we changed it,
It would show a new date.
Oh, thanks.
So I know as board members, you guys do provide ongoing feedback. Please continue to do so. And again, we'll continue to orient and onboard and continue to provide core competencies along the way.
Great, thank you. All right, then we'll move on to 4B, the annual compliance report.
All right, so this is one report that we look at annually in this committee. Ultimately, we provide this report for two reasons. One, it keeps this committee informed of pertinent information. Two, it's also a CARF accreditation requirement. For anyone who might be unfamiliar, CARF, the Commission on Accreditation of Rehabilitation Facilities, is our accrediting body. They evaluate our business and governance practices as well as our oversight of our network providers. So this is in part of that requirement. And just to let everyone know that any of the complaints that are received by the mental health board, including any occurrences that happen within our facility, we investigate, we fully document it, and we want to make sure that we're looking for continuous quality improvement opportunities. Complaints against funded programs often include a review of relevant policies and procedures with process improvement recommendations made where needed. If warranted, we also enforce contractual special conditions. For more serious concerns regarding funded programs, especially if an allegation is substantiated, our board president and our ethics and compliance committee chair are notified. Additionally, any substantiated concerns and required actions are also summarized and brought before this committee. So for fiscal year 24, you'll see on the report that we logged a total of 28 separate issues. We do look for trends. We did not see any real trends, and by that I mean we did not have multiple complaints about one specific program. We did have 2 providers that received between 2 and 3 complaints, but they were regarding separate issues. We did have 3 sentinel events reported by our network providers, it's a continued downward trend, as we saw 4 in fiscal year 23 and 5 in fiscal year 22. We also saw a decrease in building and other critical events in fiscal year 24 compared to 15 in fiscal year 23. The door lock issue seemed to be the most frequent issue reported this past fiscal year. The compliance report also includes drills conducted here at this building. Participation in the drills are mandatory not only for our staff, but also for our building tenants. We conduct these drills. We also time them to make sure that we're completing these within the allotted time frame. So in fiscal year 24, we conducted tornado drill, a bomb threat, and evacuation fire drill. We also made sure that the panic button was working as needed, and all of the time drills were completed in the required time frame. Any questions on that part of the report?
I just have a question on I know you said that if there's complaints, and again, because I'm new to this committee, so if there's complaints against a provider and you have that documentation, does that carry over into like the next allocation round? Is that like anywhere noted or considered in that?
Yeah, there's like a challenge with the program. If the program is not operating as we expect, or if there's complaints from clients about the programs, we absolutely are including that in the application. We're making sure it's notified. You know, we get frequent complaints. Some might be for programs that we fund, but often we actually see programs we don't fund where we get the complaints.
And do you know that too, like in case that provider were to come forward or?
We definitely have, yeah, if there was a request for services for that particular program, we would absolutely note that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and a little further down on the next page, we also take a look at our HR trend analyses. We didn't have any real trends. The compliance and quality assurance analyst position was one that we saw turnover in fiscal year 24, but again, no real trends to note.
All right, if there's no other questions, we'll continue with 4C.
All right, and again, trying to be respectful of time because I know we have another meeting immediately after this. I'll stick to the highlights, but please, if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So on page 7, we are looking at the levy-funded programs that are either funded under fee-for-service, grant, and or purchase of position. So we see in quarter 4 that domain 1, increased knowledge and resiliency, domain 3, increased level of functioning, and domain 5, housing stability, all saw good increases in quarter 4 compared to quarter 3. Domains 1 and 3 were still below the network target percentages. However, just to bring everyone in this committee up to speed, prior to 2023, we only requested percentage improvement from our providers. Starting in 2023 reporting, we requested a breakout for a few of the domains 1, 3, 5, and 7, where we offered the opportunity to provide reporting on percentage improved and percentage maintained. Going under the assumption that prior to 2023, it's likely that some of our providers included the percentage maintained individuals under that improved section. Otherwise, they would have to report them as declining. So we're assuming that some of this has to do with not breaking out the percentage maintained. So domain 2, abstinence reduction in use, domain 4, employment and education, both remain consistent in quarter 4, and both saw above average network target percentages. Moving on to page 8, we see that domain 6, criminal justice involvement, showed a slight decrease in quarter 4. Again, another reminder for new members of our committee, we had a newer provider that was reporting on this domain, the police social work program, but they utilized re-engagement with law enforcement officials as the criminal justice involvement metric. In the past, we had just one provider report on this, so we did see that this metric consistently fell below the target, the network target. But again, they were using that domain a little differently than we would have expected. Domain 7, social connectedness, also saw an increase in quarter 4. And domain 8, which reflects the total number as well as the total number of new individuals served by these programs, also saw an increase for both of those figures in quarter 4. Domain 9, which is client or consumer experience survey, we saw a slight decrease in quarter 4 and just slightly below network target percentage. For wait lists, we saw an across-the-board decrease in number of programs, number of individuals, and number of days in which somebody is on a wait list, which is good to see.
I'd like to just comment on that one of the initiatives our strategic initiatives that we've had for this past year was related to 1.1.3, which was next day appointments. And the network has done a phenomenal job at really trying to get next day intake appointments at their agencies. So we have one agency, for example, who now has Monday through Friday intake appointments from 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. for all ages. We have another agency for substance use disorder who does the same thing, Monday through Friday intake appointments. And we have another agency, or CCBHC, who's doing Tuesday intake appointments, but also has availability on different therapist schedules daily for urgent, high-risk cases. So I think that has a lot to say about our strategic initiatives with the network, and really trying to reduce some of the wait list that we've been seeing.
I have a question. I'll preface it by giving some history. I'm curious, in the previous, one of the decisions that we talked about was moving from multiple domains that everybody had to pick from when they were going to do their reporting. So funded agency would get funded, they'd have to pick more than one domain to give us outcome measures on. That created programs that just didn't fit into two domains, giving us information that this committee, Karen and her team, felt was not accurate, useful, or helpful. So one of the, I guess, missions of the previous chair had been to how do we get accurate data? And the way we did one small change was say, hey, only one domain. Pick the domain that really speaks to your program. We want outcomes on the program that we're funding. We're not wanting you to stretch your data to try to make it work for us. So I'm curious, now that we have a whole fiscal year difference, what your perceptions are on kind of the numbers, the accuracy, et cetera, and how that's changed, especially for some of those outlier programs that didn't really fit into two domains.
Well, actually, we're going to see that in fiscal year 25.
Oh, yeah.
So we,
oh gosh, I'm ahead of myself. Yeah. So in this one, which were the ones that we feel are not, which bucket did they fall into when they had to pick a second bucket that didn't fit the most? I'm kind of curious about that.
sure, and we'll talk a little bit on further down in the agenda, but you did receive a handout regarding the domain selections, and interestingly enough, domains 4 and 6 were picked by none of the providers.
Yeah. Okay. Which answers my question. I thought it was relevant to kind of talk with everybody on this committee. We're looking at, how accurate the data is if they feel like it doesn't really fit. And then, as long as we're talking about it, if you don't mind, Amy, some additional things that this committee really looked at were like the measurement tools, the evidence-based practices that people used, and trying to see if that could get limited. So I know in this last funding application cycle, Karen did a great job of sort of limiting the number of domains, but also the types of instruments that people would report on. And I think our hope was that we would get better information to be able to, for instance, compare outcomes on like instruments. So if you've got 4 therapy clinics and they're all using similar tools, then you can really see what the outcome comparisons are between them. So that's something else that you can see in that outcome summary under measurement tools. And I'll be excited to see what happens in the next year with that.
So I have 2 questions, and again, it's because of my lack of knowledge on using this. So I guess the first one is, how do you use it? I mean, as I look at this, I see like network targets, I see if it hits it or doesn't hit it. It's kind of, so if beyond that, how is this utilized, or how are we supposed to utilize it as a committee to, and then once we know that, like, what do we use it for? How does it get enacted, change?
So the staff actually, we're looking at the individual responses, and this committee had received all of that data in the past, and my understanding is that was just a lot of data, really detailed, multiple tab spreadsheets. So we're looking, the staff is looking at that to make sure that if there are drops in those percentages, again, I think we're going to see a little bit of change in fiscal year 25. Fiscal year 26, for the fiscal year 26 application, that's when we're going to have more recent data where we can actually take a look at that maintaining. We'll finally have enough maintaining percentage data to be able to put target percentages in the application. So I think fiscal year 26 will be a much better representation of those targets. I do want to at least share with this committee too. So in the last fiscal year, we had many of our providers, so well over 60 programs. We looked to see what tools were they using. And the majority of them, 57 programs, were not using an industry standard tool according to what we put on the fiscal year 25 application. So many of the providers did actually change their tool that they're using for outcomes. So it's going to be an interesting year to see how that plays into those percentages. But I think that's something that this committee will be looking at and seeing how that goes.
So is this kind of evolving? Is it fairly new? Wait, no.
We've had some pretty rapid changes that have happened recently. That's how I would describe it.
So we're going to be evaluating and making those targets more succinct.
Okay, so then it can be utilized in the allocation process then to better measure and compare apples to apples, I guess, is what it kind of sounds like then. So then, thank you for that. And then the second part I have is, when I also look at this, one thing you notice is like the quarter one, quarter two, the numbers are significantly higher in a lot of those. What is the reason for like the reason that the quarter one, quarter two are higher than the 3 and 4? Is there a reason for it?
And I apologize, are we talking about the percentages or the numbers?
No, the actual numbers.
Yeah, so that's, so here's the other thing for this committee to be well aware of. So with those 2 domain selections, people were counted twice. So we're actually, in all of the domains, starting in fiscal year 25, we're going to see smaller client details, except for domain 8, which is the total number served and total new served. That should be similar, and you can see the changes from year over year. But we will have, right now we can estimate that the majority of clients that are reported in fiscal year 24 and previous, they're reported twice, in one domain and that second domain, just based on the requirement that the Mental Health Board had asked providers to select 2 domains to report on. So we've seen certain programs, like in quarter 3, we saw substance use disorder programs and education, like youth-based programs, saw higher client counts. However, the majority of our providers actually saw lower client counts. So it really does ebb and flow. We do tend to see those drops in quarter 3. Quarter 4 seemed to be a little bit lower in clients served. However, one change we had also implemented, if we are not funding a provider for that quarter, if they utilize their fee-for-service dollars, we did not collect outcomes for them.
Okay, so some of them may have ended by then and didn't have fee for service, that might be the drop off in the 3, 4. Yeah. Okay. But the others should be fairly consistent because they're on a monthly.
The grant, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, it's a pretty significant difference on some of them, so, okay, thanks.
And finalizing. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Just a real quick one, and I'm wary of wasting the committee meetings time. But and Carolyn's correct, like domain number 8, 15,000, 15, 8,000, 9,000, it does drop off significantly. But who would be a good person to ask to get definitions of some of these? Like, I would assume domain 8 access capacity, is this like the total number of people that were served? Or
yes.
Just so, who would be best to define some of these for me so I understand it just a little better? Because when I read it, I'm kind of wondering exactly what services, domain 8 or 7.
Yeah, absolutely.
So who would be the best to catch up to this? Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
I'll contact John that before the next board.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Karen, I also would like to meet with you, possibly with John, when we do that, because I had some questions as well. So I apologize if these are things I should understand, but domain 8, I see we're comparing quarters, but how can we compare that to prior years? that a number that's available?
We can absolutely provide like a 3-year comparison.
Okay. And then,
Yes, yeah, we can provide the 3-year network aggregate, absolutely.
well, and more than specific numbers, just knowing what the trend of the increase in services being provided. And then compare the requests, like requests for service versus people service. Because when we come to the wait list time, some of the length of time we're waiting is like over 3 months. And to me, that's something that we obviously should address, but I don't even know which programs it is. So if it's a program that's, if it's depression, it's a crisis, and if it's something that is more chronic or less urgent, then it's still something to address, but it's less of a crisis.
Karen, I was wondering what we could probably do, because we have the aggregate data, and we could, at future meetings, provide the aggregate data just for the board to see that. And then if they have any questions on that, I know your team goes through it very carefully, but that could be something that we provide, help answer those questions.
You just would give me a place where you're at compared to prior years, and it makes a huge difference if you're seeing a lot more clients.
Well, we're talking about adding things for Karen. I just want to make sure, because we are kind of massively changing the data that's going to be collected this year, and I'm questioning if that will even be useful information, not because what they're requesting doesn't make sense, but when every year we're comparing the same type of thing and the same type of programs, it makes sense to look at that, but I think we're going to be looking at really different numbers of engagement programs that choose those.
So the aggregate may make more sense versus historical numbers.
Yeah, we've done a lot in this committee of not making math just to make math, because what we found is sometimes it wasn't actually telling us something that was relevant or useful because we weren't comparing apples to apples to apples. So by having the domain switch, and then depending on which programs are even participating in that domain, some of the domains that could be relevant if you had the same programs in it year after year, some of the domains could be, that information wouldn't be as useful. So I think we'd have to have a list of which programs for every single year maybe handy if we're gonna compare that information. That's all I would add to that.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, we did get an email that had the program and the wait list on each one. And I found it helpful just because I think that some of the programs that have longer wait lists, it was understandable for that program. Like, it's just the way, the nature of that program is that people get on it and they enter that program for years and years, and so that wait list is a lot longer. So there was an email just to let you know that was done, so that might be helpful for you.
So you, for example,
Yeah, it went by each one and how many days, so it kind of, you might need to understand the program that to see if it coincides with that. So just check your email if you can see that one.
I think that my questions could probably be answered when we need more than something we can reflect. And I'm going, not that for people who don't have my questions.
Absolutely happy to meet.
Great, so I think next is audit schedule.
Actually have a little bit more.
Oh, I apologize.
No,
I
it's
apologize.
okay, thank you. There's a lot with outcomes. So moving on to page 9, and these are figures, so these are programmatic type figures. So we see in Q4, we saw decreases for both Away Out and Connect to Recovery participants. These services are provided by New Directions. Naloxone distribution also decreased, which is provided by Live for Lolly. Unfortunately, we saw an increase in both overdose and suicide deaths in Q4 compared to Q3. We did see fewer deaths in fiscal year '24 over '23, but it's still unfortunate to lose even one person. Some good things in Q4 on this particular report. We did see another increase in the number of professional trainings provided through the Mental Health Board. There was also an increase in the number of QPR and mental health first aid trainings in Q4 provided by NAMI. Were there any more questions on this particular report? And we can go ahead and move on to page 10, which highlights the opiate settlement funded programs. Again, we have just a few programs that are funded under this in fiscal year '24. I also want to add a note here that in fiscal year '25, you're going to see not just the domain 2, you're also going to see domain 1 that was added, and this is to appropriately accommodate SDV programs that provide education-based services such as naloxone training. We see very slight, there's only minimal changes noted in this quarter over last, very slight decrease in domain 2. It's still above the network target percentage. We also saw slightly less participants in domain 8, which again, these particular programs saw an increase compared to most programs in Q3. Domain 9, consumer experience survey, remains steady and just slightly below the network target percentage. Any questions on this report? All right, we can move on to page 11, the pay for performance outcomes. And just a reminder that in fiscal year '25, this will be renamed to Access Grant Outcomes, just because that funding type name has changed. So prescriber capacity and utilization have both decreased in Q4. Some reductions can likely be explained by holiday vacation time, so prescriber availability will impact that number. No-show rate has decreased and remained below network target maximum for the entire year. Productivity was slightly increased, which is good to see. Wait time increased a little bit, which is easily explained by the decreased capacity, and there's also more clients seen in Q4 over Q3. Average wait time also remained below the network target maximum for the entire year. We saw increases, again, in the total clients served in Q4, new clients and total clients. We saw a decrease in client-reported hospitalization, which is also great to see. And then client-reported crisis utilization just remained the same across all 4 quarters. I mentioned this in this meeting before, but for the benefit of our new members, it's typically not the same providers that are reporting the same numbers. It just happens to work out that way in the aggregate where the number might stay the same, but it's usually different providers are reporting different numbers throughout the different quarters. Any questions on the outcomes?
All right, thank you. So now the audit schedule. I appreciate it.
So in front of you is the audit schedule, and we sincerely appreciate your strictest confidence in keeping that information quiet. This schedule it has potential to change depending on provider availability. It's comprised of 30 agencies and 72 programs. It could possibly change depending on provider availability. There are times where we ask to schedule an audit within a particular week, and we might have key program staff who is not available. And so we have to kind of shift the schedule around to make sure we can see it maybe the next month. We see each provider annually, at least once. We might see some of our providers more than once. A few reasons that might require or why we might want to see a program or provider more than one time in a fiscal year includes funding a new agency or a new program, or if there's any noted concerns about an organization or program. Some of those concerns could relate to previous audit-related findings, any data reporting concerns that we have, any service operating concerns that are communicated to the Mental Health Board, and also if we see greater than 10% utilization in the fee-for-service programs.
Could you talk a little more about scheduling and whether providers are given a heads up and how much time they're given?
Absolutely, thank you. So we try to give a 2 to 3 week notice about wanting to schedule the audit. And then 24 hours before the audit, we provide the selected client IDs. Our providers, majority of the programs do need to report monthly service data to us that we do desktop audits for, making sure we're removing any duplicates, either for clinicians or clients. And so we use that information to provide the selected client IDs for audit, but we don't give much window for that.
I had a question about this. When we do the IGAs, are we asking for outcomes and are we asking them to give us this kind of information separately?
You mean the work plan?
Do you mean independent contracting agreement?
Yeah, the people that we did the Guardian one year, but that didn't work out, and I know we've done those in the past. I'm just curious if we collect data like their outcomes, because I don't see them on these.
Yeah, ICAs are outside of our funding, our audit schedule. They have different monitoring and reporting requirements, but they do not show up on our audit schedule. These are in our funding agreement. We're contractually able to conduct audits. The independent contracting agreement looks a little different.
The independent contract agreements usually are not service related. So they're usually things outside of client services, and they do have their own reporting and their own things that they do turn in, but it's different because it's not client service.
But does that ever get presented to this committee?
Maybe not, like our trauma informed, probably not, but I do it in the ED reports. Okay. I put in information in the ED reports regarding the progress and so forth. So that's probably where you find that information.
Okay. Yeah, as it pertains to thinking about things we want to support in allocation season, it's nice to kind of understand some of those and, you know, even in your trauma informed, like how many events, how many, you know, things are you doing? I'm sure there's some measure of success with those. And it would feel somewhat relevant to bring that up maybe in these meetings. If possible, I don't know, I don't want to say more work.
Again, it's not client services, so you'll see that information in my ED reports.
Yeah, okay.
And then always in Founded, you know, during the application process, we'll always be scoring and putting in information and they come through that process again. But usually independent contract agreements probably would. They would stay on Founded.
Any other? All right. Can I take a photo of this, or would you rather not at all? Because I know we're turning these back in, right, the schedules. Am I able to record it at all, or would you rather that I not? You'd rather we not? Oh, sorry.
It's up to Leo's discretion.
As long as you're not sharing it with providers.
No, just as the chair, I want to kind of record it on my own, but I absolutely would not share it. Okay. So old business, I know we've discussed this a little bit, but formally funded program domain selections, there are additional topics.
Honestly, we covered it just a little bit ago. So yes, we will not have domain 4 or domain 6 showing up in the fee-for-service summaries in fiscal year 25. We did reduce from that 2 domains to 1 domain, and we did receive feedback from the network that they were appreciative that this chair, and this board, and this committee has kind of taken into account what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and being willing to take an honest look at not requiring things just to require things.
Would it be possible to, and if this information is readily available, please tell me that. I would like to get a better understanding of some of the industry standard instruments that are used. Is there research I can do? Would that be on our website? Just to understand when they are reporting, what are the names of the instruments they're using to report and so on. Sure.
So you're talking about the provider selected tools. Yeah, we can actually provide, if the committee would like to see that, we can absolutely provide that to this committee. You can send it in an email.
Is there any new business? Right?
I just do have to say, I know that there's some new board members, but the audits that the team does are very, very intense. So, you know, Karen and her team just does a phenomenal job going out to the providers, going through very, very detailed information and reporting, and it takes them a very long time. Sometimes she's recruiting other mental health board staff members for some of the bigger providers to assist with doing some of those audit work. So I thank you very much. I know when you go out to Pioneer, you usually take on a few other people. But Karen does a phenomenal job, and I know Kayla's here today. Again, wonderful job with the audits and compliance.
Yeah, I wanted to just make a comment. Last year, we had a lot of conversations in this committee, and some of them on trying to help providers by only measuring what matters. And I thought it relevant to speak to the fact that as we have ideas on how to do these things, how important it is to sit with the providers and trust that they know their clientele best and they know the kinds of instruments that, you know, craft meaningful data. And to just share that there was sensitivity and upset, you know, within the last year from our providers at some of the ideas that our committee had come together. And our last ethics and compliance chair, Greg Alexander, did a wonderful job of bringing people in for a meeting to really let them speak and hear their voice, and that change that we make around the collection of data really should be so collaborative with them, and that it can sometimes mean massive implications in their programs, how they collect data, how they interact with their clients. So just one thing I've learned from being on this committee is, you know, slow to change and, you know, make sure that they're a big part of that conversation. I've had multiple people come up to me over the last year or so from funded agencies, and it's a wonderful conversation to ask them when you have the opportunity to say, how is data collection going? Is it useful? Is it meaningful for you? Because ultimately, we have to have some numbers, but we want to make sure that it's the data that they would naturally craft in their own business to make sure that they're doing excellent quality work. And that was a little bit of the history, I think, that we've gone through, at least Amy and I. And as we look at any opportunities for bettering things, just slow and steady would be something I would throw out there.
Any additional member questions, comments? All right, can I have a motion to adjourn? Is that it? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.